Arguably, the biggest thing we learnt about the sequel to Breath of the Wild from its most recent teaser trailer was that it would include many new floating islands high above Hyrule. Their inclusion, however, has raised many questions which I will attempt to pose an answer to in this video, such as where they came from, and what civilization once, or still do, live upon them. In this video, I will attempt to uncover the answer to the mystery of the Sky Islands. One of the biggest questions the addition of these Sky Islands has raised, if you get my joke there, is where exactly they came from. If you've played Breath of the Wild, you would be well aware that nothing even remotely similar to what we saw in the trailer can be found, which is why I disagree completely with the premise that they rose from Hyrule's surface like Hyrule Castle itself. There is simply nowhere in the first game's Hyrule with landscapes or architecture matching what we saw in the trailer, so I think that we can pretty comfortably cross this one out. Another common theory I've heard talked about a lot online is that the islands are really part of another realm, specifically the Sacred Realm, which is in lore supposedly a holy world connected to the land of Hyrule, said to be the resting place of the mythical Triforce. While, yes, the golden coloured trees and foliage seen in the trailer do lend credence to the idea that these lands are somewhat holy, I don't completely agree with this idea. This is partly because there is a shot in the trailer in which we can see Link standing on one of these islands, with the land of Hyrule far below him. If it really was another realm, I found it doubtful that you'd be able to see one from the other. I won't deny that this is a fairly likely possibility, however, with the structure seen in the trailer appearing similar to that of Japanese Shinto shrines, which is said to mark the gateway between the physical world and the divine. Another idea I've heard online quite a bit is that the reason these islands aren't present in Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is that they don't exist anymore at the time of that game, that these islands only exist in the past. Overall, I'm not too keen on the idea of time travel, but there are admittedly a few moments in the trailer which suggest it may play a role in the game. For example, there is a scene where we see Link using some sort of power from his hand to reverse time on a metallic ball, or the scene where a puddle turns into a water droplet and then falls upwards into the sky. The backwards, inverted music heard throughout both teasers suggests this too. However, this isn't what I believe. Instead, my theory is the following. In Skyward Sword, the earliest chronological game in the Zelda series, we learn of the existence of the Cloud Barrier. This is a barrier of clouds, as the name suggests, created by the goddess Hylia long ago to separate the surface from the sky. In that game, the sky was full of floating islands, most notably the town known as Skyloft, drawing parallels to what we see in the teaser. I believe that the islands seen in the new Breath of the Wild 2 teaser are in fact the remnants of the Sky Islands seen in Skyward Sword, and the reason we can't see them in Breath of the Wild is that while they still exist, the cloud barrier hides them from view. You may say that surely you'd still be able to see this barrier of clouds from the ground, but if you play Skyward Sword, you'll see that from the surface the sky appears blue and cloudless, with no islands present and no really obvious sky barrier present either. Furthermore, in Breath of the Wild, there were 3 mysterious dragons who flew around the map in set paths, who are crucial to this theory. They were named Farosh, Dinral and Naedra. What's of note about the dragons is how they end their set flight paths. Specifically, they fly towards the sky before entering some kind of portal which is seemingly made of clouds, and firstly they disappear. I believe that the portal we see is these dragons carving a pathway through the cloud barrier and entering the land of the Sky Islands we see in the recent Breath of the Wild 2 teaser, and they seemingly disappear as the barrier obscures them from our view, and therefore the islands from view as well. One issue with this theory, however, is that the shot I earlier mentioned, which shows Link standing on one of the islands, with Hyrule visible far below. Surely, just like in Skyward Sword, the cloud barrier would hide Hyrule from view here. I posit that somehow Ganondorf's seal is directly tied to the preservation of this cloud barrier, and that when he awakened, therefore, the barrier disappeared or maybe was weakened, meaning you can now see one kingdom from the other. Strangely, however, the opposite doesn't appear to be true, with there not being a single moment in the trailer in which the Sky Islands were visible from the surface. Maybe the sky barrier just hadn't broken at that part in the game yet? That's one possible explanation, but who really knows? Finally, to contribute to this theory, It's worth noting that there is an NPC in Breath of the Wild named Shamay, found in the woodland stable. He states that good kids can see the kingdom floating in the sky. Whilst this could merely be seen as a reference to Skyward Sword, or maybe the kid is just batshit insane, I take this as proof that the Sky Islands really do exist at the same time as Breath of the Wild. I do wonder how he can see them though. That is admittedly a fault in this theory. Another question about the Sky Islands that needs answering is who exactly lives or lived there, or maybe even constructed them, but I don't think they were man-made. You can see lots of natural features on them, you can see trees, grass, that's really off topic, because we're just going to proceed assuming that they are natural, but then people did exist or do still live there. It is clear that people have set foot on these islands at some point in time, with the multiple archways and temple-like structures seen, along with this massive one I'll show on screen here, being proof of this. In fact, if you pause some of the shots and look closely, you'll see pathways, platforms, and more, such as this extremely man-made looking thing. The brief shot showing a new golem-like enemy also proves this, with a distinctly man-made appearance. Perhaps the people who used to, or still do live here, created it to guard their structures maybe? So, who exactly are these people? I believe that there are three main candidates. One definite possibility as to the answer to this question is that the people who once resided here are the Sheikah tribe seen in Breath of the Wild, alongside briefer appearances in other Zelda games. There is a handful of evidence supporting this theory, although frankly I'm not convinced for reasons I'll get into later. Firstly, we know that the Sheikah were a tribe of great technological prowess, creating the colossal divine beasts and powerful guardians, for example. As such, it does seem plausible that they would be able to create technology capable of resisting gravity, therefore keeping the islands floating, as well as creating the mechanical golem-looking creature. There are also a couple of examples where Sheikah iconography can be seen in the trailer, such as this eye-like design on Link's new shield, or this part of the new mechanical enemy, which is shaped somewhat like an eye. Additionally, while this is admittedly a stretch, I find that the very blocky, cube-like bottoms of the floating island somewhat resemble the interiors of certain shrines. Despite all of this, however, it's clear that the architecture isn't a perfect match for that of the Sheikah, meaning that if it really were them who once resided on these islands, it was most likely a much more ancient version of them, or possibly a subset of them, with a different architectural and constructive style. Personally, however, I don't believe the Sheikah are the answer to the question who once resided here, as I don't think Nintendo would want to make a whole new Zelda game focusing on them once again. I think that they would want to focus on a new tribe this time around. Also, with seemingly all of the Sheikah technology present on the Hyrule surface in the first game having vanished, such as the towers or divine beasts, I seriously doubt that they are involved in any way whatsoever. Okay, I know. The Zonai are an incredibly controversial topic in the Breath of the Wild theorizing community, and I also don't like relying on them too heavily as the answer to many of the questions posed by Breath of the Wild. It's somewhat similar to taking any question ancient history poses, such as how the pyramids were built, and claiming it was really done by aliens for the sake of convenience. But I truthfully do believe that there is a decent amount of evidence suggesting that the Zonai had at least some involvement in the history of these islands, with them perhaps residing there at some point in time, and we need to start by linking them with the green energy. Luckily, that's fairly easy to do. In the first teaser trailer for Breath of the Wild sequel, we witnessed Link and Zelda coming across the corpse of a mysterious figure, most likely Ganondorf, being held down by a mysterious green hand seeping energy of the same colour. But why exactly do I believe this energy is in some way linked to the Zonai? Well, if you inspect the first teaser closely, you'll notice a very distinct architectural style being used on the walls and entranceway to the place where the corpse, and thus the green energy, seemingly resides. The architecture in question is very blocky and yet stylised, featuring iconography of dragons, claws, and most notably swirls. A swirl-like pattern can also be seen in the overhead shot above the corpse, which shows the green energy spiralling downwards in a swirl shape. Now, it gets interesting when you compare this construction style to that of the Zonai ruins found in the first game. You'll find that dragons, claws and swirls are repeated motifs found in both the trailer and the game, with an architecture style incredibly similar. I believe this connects the green energy to the Zonai tribe, but surprisingly enough, there is actually more evidence that they are connected in the second trailer. The scene I'm talking about is the one in which Link uses what appears to be a flame-throwing shield to combat a huge new worm enemy underground. What's of note here is the design of the flame-throwing shield. It clearly depicts a dragon, one of the designs featured heavily in the first game's Zonai ruins, and if you slow it down enough, you'll be able to catch a glimpse of some of the teeth inside the dragon glowing that same green hue from the first trailer. Personally, this was enough to get me to believe that there was a definite connection of some kind between the Zonai tribe and the mysterious green energy. Now, we need to prove that there's a connection between that green energy and the floating islands. It's hard to spot in your first time watching the second teaser, but there are moments where a green glow can be spotted on the undersides of the floating islands, suggesting it may be in some way responsible for keeping them from falling to the surface. The other time that aforementioned green energy can be seen in the Sky Islands is when we see the new enemy. If you slow it down enough, you can easily see a sort of strand of this green energy flowing through the different parts of its body, perhaps powering it? I believe that these two examples prove a connection to the green energy seen throughout both teasers and the Sky Islands. Plus, with us already knowing that the green energy will play some sort of major role in the game, alongside the Sky Islands, it's fair to assume already, even without this evidence, they are somehow linked. With all of this being said, I do genuinely believe that the Zonai may have at some point in time resided on these islands. Perhaps they live there currently, and the reason they supposedly vanished from Hyrule a long time ago is that they fled upwards to these islands. We know that they were deeply devoted to the three dragons, and since the evidence suggests that the dragons have seen this sky world, perhaps they have found some way of communicating to them to learn of these islands' existence. Now, whilst I will admit that the structures seen on the Sky Islands don't match perfectly with that of the Zonai ruins seen in the first game, I do think they bear some notable similarities. For example, there are times where some admittedly blocky swirl-like symbols can be seen, as well as the inclusion of these teeth-like structures on the temples, matching with the barbaric, animal-like iconography the Zonai are so well known for. Finally, there is a third possibility as to who resided on these islands, and the answer is a tribe or organisation we are currently unaware of. Whilst this one is a lot less exciting than the Zonai theory, we have to keep it in consideration. We truly know very little about these islands at this point in time, so it's best to keep an open mind. I want to thank you all very much for watching. This was my first time making a proper theory sort of video on the channel, as I wanted to present my thoughts and findings as to the origins and inhabitants of the floating islands. I'm aware that my ideas may not be very original, but I hope that the way I presented them was at least somewhat unique and entertaining to you guys. Peace everyone. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!